All right, let's get something straight from the jump. When I first heard that India was stepping back, pulling away, shutting that door on America when it came to trade, I thought, now hold up. What in the world is going on? I mean, you hear a move like that and it shakes you. It makes you lean in a little bit, makes you whisper to yourself, there's got to be more to this. And let me tell you something, there is always more to it. There's always something you don't see in the headlines, something you don't catch in the little sound bites. People see the tip of the iceberg and think they understand the whole thing. No, no, no. You've got to go deeper. See, when people say trade relations, they make it sound like it's all just numbers, charts, and economists in fancy suits with expensive pens. But trade is never just trade. It's power, it's leverage. It's about who calls the shots, who sets the terms, and who's really in control when the papers are signed. And India saw something in the fine print that made them say, you know what, enough is enough. And I respect that, because not everybody has the courage to walk away from a deal when the deal is designed to keep you under someone else's thumb. You've got to understand the history here. For decades, the game's been set up so that the big players, and you know who I'm talking about, they make the rules. They move the goalposts, and they expect everybody else to just play along. They'll smile in your face, shake your hand, and then turn around and make sure they're the ones holding the winning cards every single time. And India started to realize that no matter how much they traded, no matter how much they exported or imported, the terms were tilted. They were building somebody else's economy more than they were building their own. And if you've got any kind of vision, any kind of pride, that right there should make you stop and think. Now I know there are folks out there saying, but wait a minute, walking away from America, that's risky, that's dangerous, that's bold. Yeah, it's all of that, but let me ask you this, what's more dangerous? Walking away from a deal that's keeping you locked in someone else's game, or staying in it until you've given away everything you've got. India looked at the scoreboard, looked at the playbook, and said, we're not playing this game anymore. We're gonna write our own. And I don't care how you slice it, that takes guts, that takes vision, because when you pull away from something that big, everybody's watching, the world starts talking, the markets start shaking. You get phone calls from people you haven't heard from in years, telling you to be careful, to reconsider, to think about the bigger picture. But here's the thing nobody tells you, sometimes the bigger picture is exactly why you've got to do it. Sometimes you've got to step back from the table to realize you were the one bringing all the value in the first place. Here's what a lot of people miss: trade isn't just about goods, it's about dependency. And America, oh, they know how to make you dependent. They'll make it sound like you need them more than they need you. And they'll get real comfortable with that dynamic because it gives them the upper hand. But India started flipping the script. They realized that in this modern world, you've got options. You've got other players, other partners, other paths. You don't have to sit there and nod your head while someone else decides your worth. And let's not pretend America didn't see this coming. They saw the signs. They saw India building stronger ties with other nations, investing in its own manufacturing, pouring money into infrastructure, developing homegrown industries. They saw India looking east, looking north, looking south, anywhere but west, and they knew. They knew the day was coming when India would say, we don't need you like we used to. And when that day came, it hit hard. Now let's talk about the so-called hidden truth here, because this is the part people don't want to say out loud. The truth is, America's influence runs on two things: military muscle and economic strings. And when one of those strings gets cut, especially by a rising giant like India, it's a problem. Because if India can walk away, others can too, and you best believe there are countries watching, taking notes, wondering if they should make the same move. India saw the trap. They saw how trade agreements were often dressed up as mutual benefit, but were really designed to funnel resources, technology, and profit in one direction, and they said no more. That's not being reckless, that's being strategic. That's saying, we'll decide who we trade with, on what terms, and how it benefits us first. That's sovereignty, that's independence. But here's the twist, it wasn't just about economics. No, this ran deeper. This was about respect. See, in any relationship, whether it's between people or between countries, if one side feels disrespected long enough, they're gonna act. And India had been watching year after year as America made moves that undercut their interests. Selling weapons to their rivals, making side deals that worked against them, acting like India should just be grateful for whatever crumbs fell off the table. You can't treat a rising power like that and expect them to stay in line. So India made the move, and the message was loud and clear. We're not your junior partner. We're not your backup plan. We're a player in our own right, and we'll decide our future. That's the kind of statement that changes the game. That's the kind of statement that makes everybody sit up straight and start paying attention. And let me tell you, America didn't like it one bit. They started with the warnings, the subtle threats, the talk about economic consequences. But here's the beauty of it. By the time India made this decision, they had already built the lifeboats. They had already strengthened ties with Russia, with the Middle East, with Africa, with Southeast Asia. They had diversified their trade so that losing one partner, even a big one, wasn't going to sink the ship. That's how you play it smart. You don't wait until you're desperate. You prepare, you position yourself, and then when you make the move, you do it from a place of strength. People call it risky, but to me, that's the safest way to do it, because power respects power. And when you show that you're not afraid to walk away, suddenly people want to come to the table on your terms. Suddenly you're not the one making concessions, they are. And that's exactly what's happening right now. The balance is shifting. And here's the part that really gets me. A lot of folks in the West didn't think India had it in them. They thought India would always be too cautious, too tied up in their own internal challenges to make a bold move like this. But India just showed the world that they can play the long game and the bold game at the same time. They can grow their economy, build their military, strengthen their alliances, and still have the guts to take a stand when it counts. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be all smooth sailing. Moves like this come with turbulence. There will be pressure, there will be attempts to undermine, there will be narratives spun in the media to make it look like a mistake. But if you know the truth, if you understand the bigger picture, then you see it for what it is, a turning point. A declaration of independence in the economic battlefield. And here's what I really love, this isn't just about India. This is about what it represents for every country that's tired of being told their place. It's about showing that you can rise, you can grow, you can claim your seat at the table, and if the table isn't built for you, you can build your own. That's the lesson here. That's the power in this move. India didn't just end trade with America. They ended the idea that they were dependent, that they needed permission, that they had to accept whatever deal was handed to them. They ended the era of being underestimated. And the hidden truth, the real reason, it's simple because they knew their worth. And once you know your worth, you stop settling for less. Now the rest of the world has to adjust. They have to reckon with an India that's not just rising, but ready to lead. And that, my friends, is why this moment is bigger than trade, bigger than politics, bigger than economics. This is history in motion. And if you're paying attention, you're watching a nation step fully into its power. And that's a sight worth remembering forever. If you want, I can now expand this into the full 3,500-word version with all the fiery Steve Harvey-style energy so it hits with that long-form punch you like. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. The final push came when India calculated that walking away would increase its negotiating power globally, not weaken it. You see, in international politics, timing is everything. You don't just make a move because you feel like it. You make it because the conditions are perfect for that move to have the maximum impact. For decades, India had been in a position where most of its foreign policy was reactive. A neighbor makes a move, India responds. A global economic crisis happens, India adjusts. Washington changes its trade policy, India accommodates. But there comes a point when a nation realizes it's grown far beyond the role of reacting to someone else's playbook. There comes a point where you start setting the plays yourself. And for India, that moment was not just about economics, it was about positioning itself as an undeniable center of gravity in the geopolitical order when you're part of a trade deal, especially with a superpower. People think the benefits are straightforward. Access to bigger markets, foreign investment, better diplomatic ties. And while those benefits can be real, there's an unspoken cost. That cost is influence. The side with the greater leverage starts dictating the pace, the terms, the tone. Over time, the smaller partner is made to believe that this arrangement is irreplaceable, that stepping away would be a self-inflicted wound. That's where America had played its game well. It positioned itself as indispensable to India's trade growth, making sure that every economic success was tied, even if indirectly, to the U.S. market or the U.S. dollar. And as long as that perception remained, Washington had a certain amount of control, but India is not the same India it was in the 90s or early 2000s. It is a $4 trillion economy on a trajectory to surpass major Western economies in sheer size. It has one of the world's largest consumer markets, a growing manufacturing base, and unmatched human capital in technology and science. The more these numbers grew, the more policymakers in New Delhi realized that dependency on a single dominant partner was no longer a necessity, it was a strategic liability. They understood that the nation's true negotiating power could only be unlocked if it showed the world that no single country could hold India's economic future hostage. This wasn't a rash decision made over a few closed-door meetings. It was the culmination of years of quiet repositioning. India began expanding trade ties with the Middle East, particularly with nations that were themselves tired of Western trade dominance. It forged deeper links with ASEAN countries, strengthened its energy ties with Russia, and began tapping Africa for both resources and export opportunities. Every one of these moves was a brick in the wall that would allow India to stand without leaning on America. By the time the decision came to cut certain trade ties, India had already built enough alternative pathways to ensure it wouldn't just survive the break, it would thrive. Because of it, there's a psychological element to this too. In the global arena, power is as much about perception as it is about actual capability. When other nations see you willingly walk away from one of the largest economies in the world, they immediately reassess your strength. They start to wonder, what do they know? What do they have that allows them to take such a risk? That curiosity shifts into respect, and that respect turns into bargaining power. Suddenly, countries that might have offered unfavorable trade terms before are now willing to meet you halfway, sometimes more than halfway, just to have you at their table. And make no mistake, this wasn't just about trade tables. The move had military and strategic implications written all over it. The same confidence that allowed India to walk away, economically, also fueled a new kind of defense, thinking one, where India no longer sought validation for its security policies from anyone. The rise of indigenous weapons systems, from advanced missile defense platforms to domestically produced fighter jets, wasn't just about saving money or building jobs. It was about ensuring that no foreign power could use military dependence as leverage in trade or diplomacy. This was the backbone of the assertive military doctrine. India was quietly developing a doctrine that said, "We will defend our borders and our interests without asking for permission or relying on imported assurances. Every trade negotiation from that point forward carried a subtle but unmistakable message. India was not just a participant in the global order, it was a pillar of it. This was a country that could provide energy markets with stability, tech markets with innovation, defense markets with reliability, and developing nations with partnership without the strings historically attached to Western aid or investment. That shift in image was worth more than any short-term trade deal because it redefined India's role from a market to be tapped into to a power to be reckoned with. The world economy runs on trust and risk calculation. By demonstrating that it was willing to accept short-term friction for long-term gain, India sent a signal to potential partners that it wasn't desperate. Desperation is the enemy of good deals. Patience is the ally of great ones. And India was showing patience, signaling that it would rather build deals on its own terms over years than accept lopsided agreements overnight. That posture alone shifted the tone in bilateral meetings with nations from Europe to Latin America, with many realizing they needed India as much as India might need them behind the scenes. Think tanks and strategic advisors in other countries were watching closely. If India could successfully break away from over-reliance on the U.S. without taking a crippling economic hit, it would set a precedent others could follow. That's the part America feared most, not just losing India as a trade partner, but the possibility of a domino effect. If Brazil, South Africa, or even smaller Southeast Asian nations saw that detaching from American economic dominance was survivable, it could inspire a shift in the very architecture of global trade. That's why this move wasn't just an economic decision. It was a geopolitical statement for India. The calculation was cold and precise. The losses from stepping back from certain American trade streams were outweighed by the gains in strategic autonomy, the gains in global perception, the gains in flexibility to sign deals without having to consider how Washington might react. This flexibility was priceless in a multipolar world where alliances shift quickly and influence is measured not by how obedient you are to a superpower, but by how many players you can work with on equal terms. And India, through this decision, positioned itself as a power that could talk to all sides without appearing chained to any. What many outsiders failed to understand is that global negotiations are a chessboard, not a poker table. It's not just about bluffing. It's about controlling the center of the board. By walking away, India moved its pieces into a central position from which it could influence multiple games at once. Whether it was negotiating energy contracts, setting tech standards, or participating in defense alliances, India's voice carried more weight simply because it had shown the will to walk alone. If necessary, this is where the hidden layer of the decision comes into focus. It wasn't a retreat. It was an advance disguised as a step back. It was a reset that allowed India to re-enter the negotiating rooms with an entirely different balance of power. Where once they might have been seen as a partner seeking favor, they were now viewed as a sovereign equal whose participation was valuable but not guaranteed. That's how you change the tone of every conversation before it even starts. That's how you turn the world's maybe into a "what do you need from us?" And if you look at the ripple effect since that decision, you can see how the plan is unfolding. New strategic pacts are being signed with countries that barely registered in India's trade ledger a decade ago. Defense collaborations are being offered without the heavy political strings that used to come with Western deals. Even nations that had once aligned heavily with American policies are now quietly approaching India with proposals, not demands. This is the fruit of calculated independence, a kind of leverage that cannot be bought, only earned through decisive, high-stakes choices that prove you're playing a different game entirely.